The cowboy everyone crossed the street to avoid asked her one question in the middle of a snowstorm, and she never slept the same after that. Snow slammed against the stable doors while the horses kicked and screamed inside the smoke. Evelyn's fingers burned from the frozen rope, cutting into her palms as Cole Bennett shoved the last mare into the blizzard. Then he grabbed her arm hard enough to stop her cold. "Stay behind me," he said. Blood dripped from his knuckles into the snow. Out past the fire, somebody was watching from the trees, and for the first time since marrying the most feared cowboy in Montana, Evelyn realized the town might have lied about who the real danger was. If this story pulls you in, stay with us till the end. And tell me where you're listening from tonight. Snow had been falling over Dust Creek since before sunrise. Not the soft kind either. This snow came down hard and sideways, slapping against windows, piling against wagon wheels, swallowing the dirt road that ran through town. The church bell rang anyway, slow, hollow, like it already knew this marriage was a bad idea. People crowded beneath the awning outside Miller's general store, collars turned up against the wind. Nobody spoke too loud. They just watched the church. Watched the woman walking toward it. Evelyn Brooks kept one gloved hand wrapped around the strap of her satchel, while the wind tugged at the hem of her brown wool coat. Snow gathered along her shoulders, and in the loose curls near her ears. Her boots sank into slush with every step. Someone muttered behind her. "That really her? She's actually doing it. She must be desperate." Evelyn kept walking. The church doors stood open just enough for warm lamplight to spill across the snow. Inside smelled like wet wood, cold coats, and candle smoke. Only a few people sat in the pews. Most had come for curiosity, not celebration. At the front stood Cole Bennett, tall, broad-shouldered, dark coat dusted with melting snow. He didn't move when she entered, didn't smile either. He just watched her with those still, gray eyes that always looked like they were measuring distance to something far away. A scar disappeared beneath the edge of his beard near his jaw. His hands rested in front of him, rough hands, split knuckles, old burns across 2 fingers, hands that looked like they belonged to fences and storms and graves, not marriage. Pastor Whitaker cleared his throat quietly. The wind rattled the church windows again. Evelyn stopped beside Cole. Close enough now to smell cedar smoke on his coat and cold air trapped in the fabric. Neither of them looked at the crowd. Ruthie Mae sat alone near the back, wrapped in a faded green blanket, coughing softly into a handkerchief. Her face looked smaller than it had a month ago, thin from sickness. Evelyn noticed the banker too, Calvin Pierce, clean black suit, silver watch chain across his vest, watching Cole like a man already measuring property lines. The ceremony began. No piano, no flowers, no family standing proudly nearby. Just the sound of snow beating the roof overhead. Pastor Whitaker's voice trembled slightly while he read from his old Bible. Everyone in Dust Creek knew about Black Hollow Ranch, knew the stories too. The fire, the dead brother, the women who never stayed. The ranch buried deep in the Bitterroot foothills, where the wind screamed all winter long. People said the place was cursed. People said Cole Bennett was worse. When the pastor finally turned toward Evelyn, the church seemed to hold its breath. "Do you take this man?" Her eyes dropped to Cole's hands, scarred, steady. A man who looked like he expected rejection before she even answered. For one strange second, she thought about leaving, walking right back through those church doors into the storm. But then she remembered Ruthie Mae struggling to breathe upstairs at the boarding house. The unpaid doctor bill folded inside her satchel. The final bank notice nailed to the porch 3 mornings ago. And she remembered what Cole had said when he came to see her. "I won't touch you unless you want me to. You'll have your own room. Your own money. But the bank can't take the ranch if there's a legal wife attached to the deed." Not romantic, not cruel either, just honest. Evelyn lifted her chin slightly. "I do." Something shifted in Cole's face then. Small enough most people would missed it. Relief, maybe. Or guilt. The pastor finished quickly after that. Cole slid a plain silver ring onto her finger. It was slightly too large. Cold metal. Cold hands. Cold morning. And somehow that made it feel real. Outside, the wind hit them hard the moment they stepped onto the church porch. Folks stared openly now. A few tipped hats. Most didn't. Cole helped Ruthie Mae Lynn carefully Sheriff Walter Grady's wagon, while Evelyn gathered her coat tighter around herself. "You all right?" Cole asked quietly. It was the first thing he'd said to her since the ceremony started. His voice surprised her, low, careful, like a man unused to speaking softly. "I'm fine," she answered. He nodded once. Nothing more. Across the street, the doors of the Rusted Spur Saloon swung open. Laughter spilled briefly into the cold before dying again. A drunk ranch hand leaned against the doorway with a whiskey glass dangling from 2 fingers. He squinted toward Black Hollow's new bride. Then he laughed under his breath and said something to the man beside him, but the wind carried it anyway. That ranch buried more than cattle. Cole heard it too. Evelyn knew because his jaw tightened. Only for a second. Then it disappeared again beneath that hard silence he wore like another winter coat. Sheriff Walter glanced toward the saloon, but said nothing. Nobody did. The snow kept falling. Cole walked to his horse and untied the reins slowly. Steam rose from the animal's nostrils into the freezing air. Evelyn stood there watching him for a moment. Watching the lonely cowboy nobody wanted. Watching the man she had just married. And somewhere beneath the wind and snow and whispers drifting through Dust Creek, she felt it for the first time. Not love, not safety. Something stranger than that. The feeling that her life had just stepped onto a road there would be no turning back from. The ride to Black Hollow Ranch took nearly 3 hours. By the time Dust Creek disappeared, behind them the snow had deepened across the mountain road. Pine trees crowded close along the trail, their branches heavy with white. The world felt quieter up there, wilder too. Cole barely spoke. Now and then he checked the straps on the wagon, or glanced back to make sure Evelyn's blanket hadn't slipped from her shoulders, but that was all. The horse hooves crunched through frozen snow, while wind swept down from the bitterroots, sharp enough to sting her cheeks raw. Near dusk, Evelyn finally saw the ranch. Black Hollow sat beneath the mountains like something forgotten. A long, weathered house with smoke drifting from one chimney, a crooked barn, split rail fences leaning under snow, 2 lanterns glowing faint gold near the stable doors. No music, no workers laughing, no sign of family, just cold air and silence. Cole climbed down first and tied the horses near the hitching rail. His movements were practiced and quiet, a man used to doing everything alone. "I'll bring your things in," he said. Evelyn stepped onto the porch carefully. One board creaked beneath her boot. The front door opened into warmth, smelling faintly of cedar smoke, coffee grounds, and old leather. The house surprised her. It wasn't filthy like people in town claimed. It was clean, sparse though. A Bible sat near the stove beside a cracked pair of spectacles. A coat hung neatly beside the door. Tin coffee cups dried upside down near the basin. No woman's touch anywhere. Cole carried her satchel upstairs and stopped beside a narrow bedroom at the end of the hall. "This one's yours." The room held a small iron bed, a washstand, and a window overlooking the snow-covered pasture. Someone had placed fresh quilts across the mattress. Evelyn looked at him. "You fixed this room up?" Cole shrugged once. It already had a bed. That wasn't really an answer. Downstairs, she heard him splitting wood behind the house long after dark. The sound carried steady through the walls. Thok, 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 like he needed the noise to keep something else away. Later that night, Evelyn came downstairs in wool stockings and found a plate waiting beside the stove. Biscuits wrapped in cloth to keep warm. Beans, salt pork. Cole sat at the far end of the table cleaning a saddle strap beneath lamplight. "You should eat before it gets cold," he said without looking up. Evelyn sat carefully. The coffee tasted burnt and strong enough to wake the dead. Outside, wind rattled the windows hard. "People in town talk about this place a lot," she said finally. Cole threaded the leather strap silently through a buckle. People in town got too much free time. She almost smiled at that. Almost. The next few days settled into strange, quiet routines. Cole woke before sunrise every morning. Evelyn would hear boots crossing the porch while darkness still pressed against the windows. Sometimes he came back smelling like horses and snow. Sometimes with blood on his sleeves from barbed wire cuts or calving work. He never explained, and she never asked. But little things began appearing around her, like careful apologies he didn't know how to say aloud. Dry firewood stacked neatly outside her door before storms. A new nail hammered into the loose porch rail she nearly slipped on. Extra sugar left beside her coffee cup after he noticed she used 2 spoonfuls instead of 1. One afternoon, Evelyn found him repairing the roof above her room while snow blew sideways across the ranch. "You'll break your neck up there," she called. Cole glanced down briefly. Not today. That night, the wind turned ugly. By midnight, snow slammed against the house so hard it sounded like handfuls of gravel hitting the walls. Evelyn woke to banging outside. The barn door. She pulled on boots and hurried into the storm before thinking better of it. Snow swallowed the yard instantly. Cold bit through her coat. Somewhere inside the stable, a horse screamed in panic. Evelyn fought her way through the drifts and found one of the mares tangled in broken harness straps. The animal kicked wildly, eyes rolling white. "Easy now," she whispered. Her fingers had almost freed the last buckle when the stable doors suddenly burst open behind her. Cole. Snow covered his shoulders and hair. His lantern swung violently in the wind. For the first time since she'd met him, she saw real fear on his face. "Jesus Christ," he snapped, crossing the stable in 3 long strides. I looked everywhere. Together they calmed the mare. Cole cut the frozen strap loose with his pocket knife, while Evelyn steadied the animal's trembling neck. By the time they finished, Cole's hands were bleeding, where frozen leather had torn skin open. "You shouldn't have come out here alone," he said roughly. "You would've done the same thing, that ain't the point." His breathing still sounded uneven, like he'd run harder than the storm required. Back inside the house, Evelyn handed him a clean towel near the stove. He hesitated before taking it. That hesitation told her more than words would have. Men who expected kindness usually reached for it quickly. Cole Bennett handled kindness like it might disappear if he touched it too fast. Much later, after the lamps were lowered, Evelyn stepped into the hallway for water and noticed light beneath the crack of Cole's bedroom door. Not sleeping. Again. As she passed, she heard something small hit the floor inside. A drawer sliding shut. The door stood open barely an inch. Without meaning to, Evelyn glanced through it. Cole sat on the edge of the bed, holding a burned piece of blue cloth in both hands. A scarf, maybe, charred black along one edge. His head bowed low over it, still as stone. The kind of stillness that only comes from grief too old to name anymore. The next morning, Sheriff Walter Grady stopped by with supplies strapped behind his saddle. He stamped snow from his boots near the porch and accepted coffee from Evelyn with a grateful nod. His old eyes followed Cole through the window, where he worked repairing fence posts, alone near the ridge. "Good men don't live alone like that," Walter said quietly. "Not unless something broke them first." Evelyn looked back toward the snow-covered pasture where Cole stood hammering posts into frozen ground beneath the pale winter sky. For the first time, she wondered what exactly had broken him, and whether Black Hollow Ranch was hiding more than one ghost. Winter settled harder over the mountains after that. The road into Dust Creek turned to frozen ruts beneath wagon wheels, and smoke hung low over town chimneys every morning. Evelyn only went into town twice that month. That was enough. People stared. Some pretended not to. At Parker's feed store, 2 women stopped talking. the moment she walked inside. At the butcher counter, a ranch hand tipped his hat politely to everyone except her. Cole noticed too. He never mentioned it, but afterward he rode farther ahead on the trail home, shoulders tight beneath his coat like he blamed himself for every whisper drifting behind them. One gray afternoon, a black carriage climbed the hill toward Black Hollow Ranch. Calvin Pierce stepped out, holding a leather folder beneath his arm. "Afternoon," he called, brushing snow from his sleeves. Cole stayed where he was repairing a broken gate latch. "What do you want?" Pierce smiled the way bankers did when they already knew the ending. "Just business." Evelyn stood quietly on the porch while the men talked near the fence line. She heard enough: past due notices, water rights, spring payment deadlines. Then Pierce glanced toward the ranch house. "Mercer's still willing to buy, you know. Fair price, too. Better than losing everything once the bank steps in." Cole hammered the final nail into the gate without answering. The sharp, metallic sound echoed through the frozen pasture. Pierce sighed. "You're running out of road, Bennett." After he left, Cole gathered his tools silently and headed toward the barn. Evelyn followed him halfway. "Who's Mercer, really?" Cole stopped walking. A long pause settled between them while wind moved through the pine trees beyond the ridge. "Man with too much money," he said finally. "That all?" "It's enough." But it wasn't. She could feel it. That night, she found the old records by accident. The roof above the storage shed had started leaking near the back wall. Cole was out checking fence lines before another storm rolled in, so Evelyn carried a lantern into the shed herself. Dust covered everything: broken harness hooks, rusted horseshoes, crates stacked beside old wagon parts. Near the back wall sat a small iron filing box beneath a tarp. Inside were ranch papers wrapped carefully in oilcloth, tax receipts, cattle inventories, and one folded insurance document dated 14 years earlier: Black Hollow fire claim. Evelyn unfolded the paper slowly beneath lantern light. One name appeared 3 times across the bottom: Travis Mercer, witness, property assessor, emergency claims officer. Her stomach tightened. Outside, the wind moaned softly against the barn walls. The next morning, Sheriff Walter Grady arrived before sunrise carrying coffee in a tin thermos and snow gathered across the shoulders of his coat. He found Evelyn feeding oats to the mare Cole had rescued during the storm. "You look like you didn't sleep much," he said. "I found some old papers." Walter's expression changed immediately. Not surprise, weariness. He leaned against the stall door for a long moment before speaking. "You ever wonder why Cole hates going into town?" Evelyn nodded once. Walter removed his gloves slowly. "Because every man there let him carry the blame." The sheriff's voice stayed low beneath the sounds of horses shifting in their stalls. 14 years earlier, Travis Mercer had been buying up ranch land around Dust Creek. Small ranchers couldn't survive the drought that year. Mercer offered cash. Most took it. The Bennett brothers didn't. Cole and his younger brother Eli had caught Mercer's men, setting controlled fires along dry grazing fields late one night. Enough damage to scare folks into selling cheap. But the wind changed. The fire spread too fast. Walter stared toward the mountains while he spoke. Cole got trapped trying to pull Eli out. Evelyn's chest tightened. He couldn't reach him in time. The sheriff rubbed tired fingers along his jaw. Mercer paid witnesses, bought silence. By morning, half the town believed Cole started the fire himself. "And nobody said otherwise?" Walter gave a bitter laugh. "People usually side with the man signing paychecks." Snow began falling again outside the stable doors. Soft this time. Quiet. Evelyn thought about the burned scarf hidden in Cole's room. The way he watched storms like they remembered his name. All this time, Dust Creek had called him cursed, when really he'd just been carrying grief no one else wanted to touch. That evening, Cole returned home near dark, with frost clinging to his beard and exhaustion dragging behind his eyes. Evelyn stood near the stove, holding the insurance paper folded neatly in both hands. He saw it immediately. His face emptied. Not anger, something worse. Resignation. You went through the records. The roof leaked. Cole removed his gloves slowly. I should burn those years ago. Mercer was there the night of the fire. Silence filled the room. The kettle hissed softly over the stove flame. Finally, Cole sat down at the kitchen table and stared at his scarred hands. He watched my brother die, he said quietly. Then he shook my hand at the funeral like he was sorry. Evelyn crossed the room carefully and set the paper down beside him. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she noticed something else. Another folded survey map partly sticking from the file box beside the table. Blue ink markings circled the north side of Black Hollow Creek, water access routes, underground spring locations. Mercer didn't just want the ranch. He wanted what sat beneath it, the largest water source in 3 counties. And suddenly everything made terrible sense. The bank pressure, the threats, the whispers, the marriage, all of it. Outside, snow drifted softly across Black Hollow Ranch, while inside the old house sat 2 people bound together by something deeper than either of them had expected. Not love yet, but truth. And sometimes truth changes a life faster than love ever could. After that night, something shifted inside the house at Black Hollow. Not loudly, not all at once, just little things. Cole stopped disappearing before sunrise without a word. Sometimes he left coffee warming near the stove before heading out. Sometimes he asked if Evelyn needed supplies from town instead of simply bringing them home in silence. The distance between them remained, but it no longer felt empty. It felt careful. February came hard across the Bitterroots. Wind screamed through the canyon passes for 3 straight nights, rattling the barn walls until sleep became impossible. Snowdrifts climbed halfway up the porch steps. Then the trouble started. First, it was the cattle. 3 calves found sick near the north pasture, foam around their mouths from poisoned feed. Cole buried them himself behind the ridge, without saying much, though Evelyn noticed how long he stood there afterward with his hat in his hands. 2 nights later, somebody smashed the front windows of the church in Dust Creek. By morning, folks were already whispering. Mercer warned Bennett to sell. That woman should have stayed in town. Bad luck follows that ranch. Evelyn heard every word while buying flour at Miller's store. Nobody met her eyes, even Mrs. Parker, who used to save cinnamon sticks for Ruthie Mae every Christmas, quietly moved her grandson behind her skirts when Evelyn walked past. Snow melted slowly from Evelyn's boots beside the doorway, while shame settled cold beneath her ribs. When she returned to Black Hollow, she found Cole repairing the stable doors beneath a gray sky. "You don't have to keep going into town," he said without looking up. Evelyn set the flour sack on the porch. "I'm not hiding." "You should." The hammer stopped moving in his hand. "That place turns mean when folks get scared. And you." Finally he looked at her. Wind moved through the loose strands of dark hair near her face. "I've been living with their fear a long time," he said quietly. "You haven't?" That evening, smoke appeared near the western pasture. By the time Cole and Evelyn reached it on horseback, flames were already climbing through the hay barn roof. Orange light cut through the falling snow while terrified horses screamed inside nearby stalls. Cole didn't hesitate. He ran straight into the smoke. Evelyn grabbed blankets from the water trough and beat sparks from the stable walls, while Cole dragged feed sacks out through the burning doorway one by one. By dawn, the barn was gone. Nothing left but black beams hissing beneath dirty snow. Cole stood staring at the ashes with soot dark across his jaw and exhaustion hanging from his shoulders like wet cloth. "They're getting closer," he said. Evelyn brushed ash from her coat sleeve. "You think Mercer did this?" I think Mercer pays men who don't mind dirty work." Later that night, she found papers waiting beside her bedroom door. Divorce papers. Her breath caught. Cole stood downstairs near the stove, with his back turned, pouring whiskey into a chipped glass. "You should leave before this gets worse," he said. The firelight moved softly across the walls between them. Evelyn stepped down slowly, holding the folded papers in one hand. "So that's it? It's safer. For who?" Cole swallowed hard before answering. "For you." Silence settled heavily through the room. Outside, wind pushed snow against the windows again. Cole stared down into the whiskey glass. "I survived because everybody else burned first," he said quietly. "Ellie should made it out that night, not me." Evelyn saw it then. Not guilt alone. Punishment. The man had been burying himself beside his brother for 14 years and calling it survival. She walked to the stove, opened the iron door, and dropped the divorce papers straight into the fire. Cole looked up sharply. Evelyn closed the stove door again. "I'm tired of men deciding what's best for me without asking," she said softly. The papers curled black beneath the flames. Cole said nothing after that. Much later, long after the lamps were lowered, Evelyn lay awake, listening to wind move across the roof. Then soft footsteps crossed the hallway. Cole paused outside her room, a long hesitation. Finally, the door opened just enough for moonlight to slip across the floorboards. Evelyn kept her breathing slow and steady. Cole sat carefully on the edge of the bed. The mattress shifted beneath his weight. For a while he simply sat there, quiet, tired, like a man who had spent too many years carrying something too heavy alone. Then slowly, almost uncertainly, he leaned down and wrapped one arm around her shoulders. Not possession, not desire, just relief. His forehead rested lightly against the back of her coat for one brief moment before he pulled away again. By morning, he was already outside fixing fence posts as if none of it had happened. But Evelyn carried the feeling of that quiet embrace with her all day long. Near sunset, another rider appeared at Black Hollow. A woman. Dark riding coat, dust-covered saddlebags. Blonde hair pinned tight beneath a weather-worn hat. Cole froze the moment he saw her dismount. June Bennett, his sister. She looked at him for a long time before speaking. "Mercer paid me to leave Dust Creek," she said flatly. "Paid me to keep my mouth shut about the fire." The wind seemed to disappear entirely. Evelyn felt the world shift again beneath her feet. June's eyes moved toward the burned barn behind the house. "He's scared now," she said quietly, "which means somebody's finally getting close to the truth." The cold seemed sharper after that. Evelyn stood beside the porch rail, while snow drifted slowly across Black Hollow Ranch, listening to June Bennett tell the story she should have told years earlier. "I was 19, June said, rubbing her gloved hands together near the stove. "Mercer came to me after Eli died, said folks were angry. Said Cole needed space before things turned ugly. Cole stood near the window, with his back half turned. He offered money," June continued. "Train tickets west. A house in Spokane. Told me leaving would protect the family." Her voice cracked slightly. "I took it." Nobody spoke for a moment. Only the fire snapping softly inside the stove. Finally, Cole asked, "Why come back now?" June looked toward Evelyn before answering. "Because Mercer came to see me last month." That made Cole turn fully around. He was nervous, June said. Asked questions about old papers. Old witnesses, wanted to know if I'd talked to anybody. Evelyn felt it immediately. Fear. Not theirs, Mercer's. 3 days later, Dust Creek gathered outside the county auction house. The building smelled like wet wool coats, cigar smoke, and melting snow tracked across old plank floors. Ranchers packed shoulder to shoulder beneath hanging oil lamps while Calvin Pierce arranged foreclosure documents at the front table. Cole wore his dark winter coat buttoned high against the cold. Evelyn stood beside him, holding a leather satchel beneath one arm. Across the room, Travis Mercer leaned comfortably against a support post, smiling like a man arriving early to his own victory. "Well," he drawled as Cole approached. Bennett finally decided to join civilization again. Cole ignored him. That seemed to amuse Mercer even more. Calvin Pierce cleared his throat loudly. By order of the Territorial Bank. Before you start, Evelyn said. The room quieted. She stepped forward slowly and opened the satchel. Inside sat copies of the old insurance files, payment ledgers, land surveys, signed transfer receipts, and one sworn statement written carefully in June Bennett's hand. Mercer's smile faded inch by inch. Evelyn placed the papers onto the auction table one at a time. These documents connect Travis Mercer to the Black Hollow fire 14 years ago, she said steadily, including payments made to silence witnesses afterward. Murmurs spread through the crowd. Mercer laughed once. You expect people to believe that? June stepped forward from the back of the room. I do. Every head turned toward her. Cole went completely still. June's eyes filled briefly before she steadied herself again. He paid me to leave Dust Creek, she said. Paid me to stay quiet while my brother carried blame for something he didn't do. Mercer's face darkened. You stupid girl. Sheriff Walter Grady moved beside the doorway, one hand resting near his holster. Careful now, Travis. The room shifted after that, like ice finally cracking beneath too much weight. People started whispering different things this time. Not about curses, about lies. Mercer shoved the papers violently aside. You got no proof those records are real. Walter stepped forward calmly. I already checked the county stamps myself this morning. That landed hard. Mercer looked around the room and realized too late the crowd no longer belonged to him. His jaw tightened. Then he smiled again. Cold this time. This ain't over. He shoved through the doors and disappeared into the snow. The wind outside had picked up by nightfall. Heavy clouds buried the moon completely. Evelyn woke sometime after midnight to the sound of horses screaming, then smoke. Cole was already moving before she sat upright. Stay inside, he barked, dragging on his coat. But the second he opened the front door, orange light exploded across the yard. The main stable was burning. Flames climbed the walls fast, roaring upward into the black winter sky, while terrified horses kicked against their stalls. Cole. He was already running. Snow whipped sideways across the ranch as Evelyn followed him into the chaos. Men on horseback disappeared near the tree line. Mercer's men. The smell of kerosene hung thick in the air. Cole smashed open the stable doors while smoke rolled outward in heavy waves. Horses burst into the yard wild-eyed and panicked. One of them nearly knocked Evelyn flat. Then she heard it. A child crying. Near the far fence line, little Danny Parker stood trapped beside the feed shed, frozen with fear while sparks rained around him. Evelyn grabbed the nearest horse bareback and kicked hard through the smoke. Danny! She shouted. The boy covered his face, crying while burning debris crashed nearby. Evelyn leaned low from the saddle, caught the back of his coat, and hauled him up in front of her, just as part of the shed roof collapsed behind them. Across the yard, Cole staggered out of the stable, leading the final mare through flames with one arm wrapped protectively over the animal's eyes. The roof gave way seconds later. Fire shot into the sky. By dawn, Black Hollow looked half dead. Smoke drifted from blackened beams buried beneath snow. The stable was gone. So was most of the feed storage. Sheriff Walter found Mercer trying to leave town before sunrise. They brought him back in handcuffs past the very ranch he'd spent years trying to destroy. Cole didn't even look at him. He sat instead on the porch steps staring across the ashes while weak morning light spread slowly over the mountains. There's nothing left, he said quietly. Evelyn walked across the snow toward him, carrying something small in her hand. A burned horseshoe, blackened but unbroken. She placed it gently into his palm. Then we build again. Cole looked at her for a long moment, not like a man staring at a wife he barely knew anymore, like a man seeing home for the first time in years. Winter finally loosened its grip a few weeks later. Snow melted from the valleys. Townsfolk started arriving at Black Hollow, carrying lumber, nails, fencing wire, even spare feed sacks. Nobody made speeches about it. They just helped. June stayed too. Sometimes Evelyn caught her, and Cole standing quietly together beside the rebuilt fence lines, speaking softly about Eli for the first time in years. One afternoon, Sheriff Walter hammered a fresh sign above the ranch gate. Black Hollow Ranch. The letters shone dark against new wood. By spring, the pastures had turned green again. Evelyn opened a small stable near the creek for injured horses nobody else wanted. Cole taught local children to ride in the evenings when the sun dipped gold behind the bitterroots. One afternoon, a little boy looked up from the fence rail and asked, "When did you two fall in love?" Cole glanced toward Evelyn, laughing softly beside the corral, while wind moved through her curls beneath the warm Montana sun. "Somewhere between the fire and the snow," he said. Evelyn smiled. "No," she answered gently. "Somewhere between being unwanted and finally being seen." And out beyond Black Hollow, the mountains stood quiet beneath the spring sky, while the life they built together settled deep into the land like it had always belonged there. Maybe that's the part that stays with you after the story ends. Not the fire, not the snow, not even the men who tried to destroy everything. Maybe it's the feeling of finally being looked at by someone who sees past the scars and stays anyway. Because if you've ever felt invisible, if you've ever sat alone at a table wondering whether your life mattered to anyone at all, then you probably understand Evelyn more than you think. And maybe you understand Cole too. Some people spend years carrying guilt so heavy they forget they deserve warmth, family, or peace. Sometimes love doesn't arrive loudly. Sometimes it shows up quietly with a cup of coffee left on a porch, a lantern glowing in a barn window, or a hand reaching for yours after years of silence. That's how healing begins out here. Slowly, honestly, one hard winter at a time. If this story meant something to you, I'd love to know where you were watching from tonight, and which moment stayed in your heart the longest. And if you'd like, stay a little longer with us. There are still more dusty roads, forgotten ranches, lonely cowboys, and tender souls waiting just beyond the next mountain.